Hey everyone, it's Chris Westergaard from the Language House and welcome to my series on teaching lexis. We're going to be covering a lot of great content in the next 4 videos. This first video is all about your overall approach, what to consider when planning and teaching a lexis lesson. In video number 2, we're going to cover how to actually teach new words to students, more specifically how to elicit and to become an eliciting god or goddess. In video number 3, it's all about studies, how to practice lexis, how to create exercises around them. And in video number 4, the final video, we're going to create a lexis lesson from start to finish. Sounds pretty good, right? If you like this content, please remember to click the subscribe button. You can click it right here. And also leave a comment. I love reading what people write and your feedback is always helpful. And for those who are new to teaching, do check out our TEFL certification course in Prague. It's the course that I run. It's called The Language House. You'd be surprised, but I'm the least talented person on the staff. I might be the funniest, but I'm definitely the least talented. Anyway, let's start with the video. Teaching lexis, which is another word for teaching vocab, which is another word for words. Lexis is part of the 4 systems of a language, these being lexis, grammar, phonology, and function. All these combined make up a language. Teaching lexis is one of the fundamental skills that you can have as a teacher. If you can't effectively teach lexis to your students, they're really not going to learn anything. How should teachers actually approach a vocab lesson? What words should a teacher actually teach? How do you pick them? What else should a teacher consider before they teach a vocab lesson? I've got all those answers for you. Let's take a look. Tip number 1 is to focus on usage. There is no point in teaching a bunch of random words. This is not going to help your students communicate better. What you want to do is focus on a context or a situation where these words will naturally be used. So instead of thinking of, this word or this verb or this adjective, think of that context. Think of that role play. Think of that situation, that debate, that conversation where these words will naturally be used, and pull that language out from there. This is going to be super helpful for your students, and it helps them practice the language that they're going to be using in real life. Passive and active vocab. Active vocab refers to words that your students use in real life. Passive vocab refers to language that your students know, but they don't necessarily use. So, for example, I don't really say the word verklempt that much. I know what the word means, but I don't really use it. With our students, we want to exclusively focus on active vocab. There's no point in teaching a word if we don't think our students are going to use it. So when you're selecting language to use, really think to yourself, is this a good word for my students to use? Is this the most natural word that would come up in this situation? Does this make the most sense for them? Because if it doesn't, it's probably not a good idea to teach it. Your students are going to be exposed to a ton of different language. This will happen through reading activities and listening activities and worksheets and simply just being in the real world. What we want to do is focus on the words that are the best for them to learn. Pick the best ones, so only active here. That's what you should be focusing on. But Chris, what words do I actually teach my student? I get asked this question all of the time, and it is all going to be determined by how appropriate the word is for your student. And appropriateness is mostly about the level, but there's also some other things to consider. One could be the age of your student, one could be the gender of your student, one could be the educational level, the profession that your students have, and even the culture. Some cultures may have words that are more appropriate than other words. It really all depends on those factors. Case in point, if I'm teaching a student and she's a 65-year-old judge, I'm going to probably teach her different words than I would a 14-year-old student, even if they're the same level, even if they're in the same class. So my main way of figuring this out is I look at students and I try to think of what their ideal voice would sound like. How do they want to sound in the real world? And once I know this, I can begin to curate language that makes more sense for them. In the beginning, at the lower levels, this doesn't really come up, but as you get into higher levels, it does. So think of your students, think of the words that they need, and teach that. If you are totally lost and you don't know where to go, the easiest thing to do is to simply get a textbook for your level, open it up, look at the table of contents, and you'll see some suggested word lists. That's always a good start. If you don't have a textbook, Google's your friend here. It's easy enough to Google your student's level and you'll get a bunch of word lists. Just remember though that you don't want to teach those word lists on their own. All of the language, as we talked about in point 1, should be about real life usage. So think of that context or that role play where these words would come up. Know the denotation and the connotation of the words you are teaching. Denotation refers to the literal meaning of your word, and connotation is that underlying, oftentimes emotional meaning that some words have. Obviously, gang, it's kind of ridiculous for me to tell you that you need to know what the words mean that you teach. Unless you've taught before, you probably haven't really sat down and really thought about the words you use and what they mean. You'll be surprised at all of these little differences when you really have to task yourself and say, what does this word mean? Like, when do we use it? When do we don't use it? What's the most appropriate place to use it? Does it sound weird if we use it in this situation, but it's okay in this situation? You know, all of those details are good to consider. Also, just because you know what the word is and you can explain what the word is, doesn't mean that you're going to be able to bring that meaning across to your students, because remember, they're at a lower level. You can't just explain things to them and talk to them endlessly. You have to be able to teach the word in a very digestible, clear, and direct way. So think about your words before you teach them, sometimes even look them up in the dictionary. Do yourself a favor and spend a little bit of time before your lesson to figure that all out. For a connotation, think of the words competitive and cutthroat. Similar in definitions, but the feel of the words is different. Cutthroat has more of an aggressive feel to it, has more of a ruthless feel to it, maybe even a little bit violent. I mean, it is cutthroat. So if I'm teaching that word to a student, I can't just say it's a synonym for competitive. I really have to try to get that underlying meaning across. I don't want my students going through life saying, my granny is very cutthroat with her cookie baking. It wouldn't sound right. So with your words, check the connotation, see if there's some sort of underlying emotional meaning there, and make sure to teach that as well. Parts of speech and morphology. You need to make sure that you know the different parts of speech to your word and what your word is. Is it a noun? Is it a verb? Is it an adverb? Is it a phrasal verb? Is it a modal verb? Is it an auxiliary verb? All of these things need to be known for your student to really digest it. So when you are teaching new words and you write them on the board, make sure to have the part of speech right by it. Morphology is how this word changes through the different parts of speech. This is something that you'll investigate as you go through higher levels. If you're teaching lower levels, it's probably best just to kind of go over that one specific part of speech. But if I'm teaching the word dangerous, I may also teach the noun danger. I might teach the adverb dangerously. I might even teach the verb to endanger. It really all depends on how appropriate it is for my student and their level, but it's still something that's good to investigate. It's helpful for students to see a word and how it can morph depending on if it's used as a verb, as a noun, as an adjective, and so on. Last on my list are collocations. Collocations are how words are grouped together. Vocab does not function independently. Instead, words are oftentimes grouped into specific patterns with other words that go with each other. Take, for example, the word rain. There's a bunch of different ways we can describe this. We can say heavy rain. We can say light rain. We can say pouring rain. We can say torrential rain. But we can't say thick rain. We can't say aggressive rain. We can't say oppressive rain. Why? There's no reason why except that rain does not collocate with those specific words. It collocates with light, heavy, pouring, etc. Thus, if I'm teaching the word rain to a group of students, it might do them well to know at least a few of the collocations that go with rain. However, that is going to be dependent again on how appropriate it is for your students to know this at this time. Final thoughts on lexis is going back to point number 1 that we talked about in the beginning of the video. Try not to teach by thinking of a bunch of random words. Even if those words are related to the same category, that is not the goal of lexis. The goal of a lexis lesson, the goal of teaching a lexis lesson, is to work on that end usage. So it's always better. It's always better before you start thinking of a lesson and before you start thinking of the words that you're going to teach and the category and the topic, think of the specific scenario. Think of the conversation or the debate or the role play or whatever you're doing at the end where the students are using the language freely, and from that point, pull out the most appropriate and the most useful language for your students. This is how you get your students to communicate better. If you teach a bunch of random words, yeah, sure, they'll do some exercises on them and they might even know them a little bit, but are they going to be able to use them and ask questions with the word and communicate with them? Probably not. Most of those words you teach will end up in their passive vocab. So focus on your context, pull out the words from there, and I'll see you in video number 2, where we go over how to elicit like a god or a goddess. I'm going to give you all of my tips on how to really get up and wow your students with these different techniques. And you can use this for any level or any situation and any language. I think that's it for video number 1. I've got to say thanks so much for all of the support over this last year. We are just about ready to hit 30,000 subscribers. I can't believe this. This is great. I love you all. Have a great summer. I'll see you soon. I'm out.